What's up, fantasy sports fans? Ryan here with the DFS 5-pack. Hopefully everybody's off to an awesome day, guys. That NFL Week 1, it is steadily approaching. It's going to be here in just a couple of days. I'm psyched. You're psyched. Everybody's psyched. Start rolling in that money train. Let's win some money, have some fun, watch our favorite teams play, man. I am just absolutely thrilled about this coming real close. So I wanted to take a few minutes today, and I wanted to talk about getting better at NFL DFS cash games. We'll be out with our picks all week. We've already covered running backs and quarterbacks. Wide receivers we'll be doing shortly after I get done with this. Tight ends and defenses to come. Now, if you are new to the station, best thing you can do is go ahead and press that red button that says subscribe, hit that bell so you're notified of new videos, and anybody willing to give the thumbs up. It does help us spread around YouTube. It is sincerely appreciated. If you want to join the DFS 5-pack team, we would love to have you. We're not big on all sorts of fancy optimizers and ranking things. We keep it pretty simple for y'all. We do private podcasts every single week for our customers. And then we will do a summary at week's end where we'll give you some hard recommendations on who you got to play. And then skinny down the other positions for you, give you a handful of guys to choose from as opposed to a large player pool. It's great for people who maybe don't have time to do all the research or really just want our opinion to pair in with a bunch of other sites that they take a look at. Now, if you are brand new to NFL DFS, you might be asking yourself, what is a cash game? Okay, I think let's spend a couple seconds going over that. Cash games are going to be your head-to-heads, your double-ups, and your 50-50s. I think this is an appropriate time for me to screen share. Okay. So GPPs are otherwise known as tournaments or guaranteed prize pools. And that is what you're going to see on the commercials. That's going to be your big tournaments where people win a lot of money. The majority of the cash tiers to the top few places. It's great when you win, but ultimately, unless you're really good at it, they do become a losing proposition for a lot of newer players. Now, if you're good at it, it's the way to win the big bucks. I still love cash games. Cash games are basically where half the people win and half the people lose. So, for example, as you can see up here in the top left-hand corner, there is going to be 1,704 entries in this $50 single entry double up. That means the top 700 guys will go ahead and double their money. Top 750, that means there's going to be a small area in the middle where not quite half the people double up. That's essentially what's going to be paying the rake. The rake is the portion of the buy-ins that DraftKings takes in order to run their operations. So 50-50s are going to be exactly split in half. If you got 20 entries, 10 people win. You don't quite get double your money back. That's why I like double ups. And head-to-head is just that. You're playing one guy one-on-one. These are going to be known as cash games. If you are new to the game, this is where I would recommend you spend the majority of your time, at least till you can win at a 50-50 clip at the minimum. Personally, we do really well over here. This is kind of my bread and butter for me is going to be the cash games within NFL. It's definitely my highest success rate of all the games out there. Last 30 weeks or so, a record of 25-5. So in order to win decent money, you have to be willing to bet decent money. But when you win at about a 5-to-1 clip, you can be pretty confident that you can do that. Does it suck when you lose? Yeah, absolutely. It's more fun to win $500 off of a bet of $10 than it is actually having to pony up the $500 to bet it, or $20,000 or $10. We all have different areas that we want to bet on. But to me, this feels like the easiest game to replicate winning. Now, what do you need to get for a point total in order to get into that top half? I usually use about 125 as the benchmark. There's going to be some weeks where it's going to be lower. There's going to be some weeks when it's going to be higher. It ultimately comes down to how does the chalk do that week. And if you are brand new to DFS and don't know what chalk means, chalk is essentially just going to be your popular players, the guys that a lot of people buy because they are in a good spot. They tend to be your highest opportunity for success. That doesn't mean they're going to succeed. It just means those are the guys in the most obvious situations. Okay, rule number 1, as much as you can, play guys from high-scoring games. Now, if you're not good at identifying the high-scoring games, it's really simple. Go check your Vegas odds. This is something that we all have the capability of doing. If you don't know where to check them, you have Google. Type in NFL Vegas odds. Guarantee the top link is going to be something that's going to give you the sufficient information. More than likely, it might be this website right here. Now, we look for high-scoring games, and right away you can identify Tampa Bay and New Orleans has a higher point total than the majority of the games. Houston and New England has a higher point total than the majority of the games. You look down and you see a game like Dallas, Carolina, I'm not saying you can't pull guys from there, but you're definitely not looking at like going all out on that game. In a game like Houston versus New England, you might end up with 2, 3, sometimes as many as 4 guys from that game on your roster. More points in the real game equals more DFS points, more touchdowns, going to be more yards, everything that goes along with it. In cash games where you're totally okay riding the popular players, you want to play guys from the games that are going to be more popular. Now, you don't only have to pick guys from those games. I'm just saying, as a very plain cardinal rule, that is where you want to pay your initial attention to. Me, personally, I don't always check the Vegas odds, but that's because I've been doing this for a long time. So for me, it's pretty easy to know which games are going to be higher scoring. But if you are newer to this, and this isn't something you have done a ton, and it's just a casual hobby for you as opposed to something you pay attention to for 70, 80 hours a week, I would advise bookmarking that spot. Take a look at it every single week, just at the very least so you can double check what kind of game totals people are proposing. You know, Vegas makes a living doing this. They're very good at what they do. If you don't know where it's going to go, just take a look. You want guys in higher scoring games. Next up, you're going to want to identify the chalk, identify the higher owned players to decide if that is somebody you feel the need to get into your lineup. For me, I find this to be most important with the cheap guys that are filling in or the studs. For example, and when I talk about studs, I'm talking about your Le'Veon Bells, David Johnsons, Antonio Browns, and things like that. The problem is if you skip, and let's just say Le'Veon Bell, because most people won't play him this week, and I wanted this just to be an example and not just something specific to week 1 on DraftKings, but let's say Le'Veon Bell is in a crush spot. And you can say with pretty good certainty from your experience or from whoever you trust to tell you these types of things that Le'Veon Bell is probably going to be minimum 50% owned. The problem is if you don't play him and Bell goes off for one of his classic Le'Veon Bell days, racks up 100 yards in both the air and the ground, scores a touchdown, comes in at 38 DraftKings points, and he's 50 to 66% owned, you're going to have a really difficult time being better than half the field that has him, because the stud that you grabbed had a nice day maybe, but he only went for 22. So now you're about minus 16 points, which means that you have to be 16 points better than half the field, which is a really tough proposition. Now, you're not always going to be able to identify the chalk, and you're not always going to be right, and there isn't always going to be that one quote-unquote chalk guy. But looking at your studs and who's going to be chalk that week, Alvin Kamara is going to be chalk week 1. You have to make a really important decision if you feel the need to use them, or even though it's more of a tournament play, if you think the field is wrong, you can win almost single-handedly by picking a better stud. More often than not, guys like me, I'll ride the chalk. Like, I can almost guarantee Alvin Kamara will be in my cash game lineup week 1 along with the majority of the field. It's just a safer play, but it's something you need to give a real serious look to. And if you don't have a trusted help you win money, it's what we do for a living. I feel very confident in our skills on this. That's and we'd love to have you as a team member. Next up, besides the studs, you also want to try to identify who is going to be the cheap guys that people are going to fill in with this week. Week 1, Keelan Cole of the Jacksonville Jaguars is a cheap guy that people are going to use to build their lineups. Now, with the cheap guys, what you're looking for here is, let's say, again, Keelan Cole is 50% owned. That means half the field plays him. And at 3.8, you are looking for about 10 DraftKings points out of this guy. And if you're new to this, and when I talk about the cash line being 125, and you see we have a salary cap of 50,000, that means by doing the math, you understand that a guy at 4K approximately, you need about 10 DraftKings points out of him to be normal. Well, what happens when Keelan Cole against a weak secondary goes 7 catches, 75 yards, and a touchdown, brings in 20.5 DraftKings points? Well, now you are approximately 10 points behind the field because of this cheap guy. That doesn't mean you can't overcome a loss like that. It just means that it puts you at a point where it's going to become more difficult. Usually the chalk guys I'm most concerned about are going to be the studs and the cheap guys. Everything is slate dependent, so sometimes there'll be a middle tier guy in there in a crush spot that you're going to want to take a look at as well. I'm just saying, for me, as a blank canvas cardinal rule, I'm typically more worried about the cheap guys and the studs being the guys that could affect my my ultimate ability to go ahead and win. Then you're also going to get a guy like a T.Y. Hilton. T.Y. Hilton is a bad play most weeks, but he has 3, 4, 5 games a year that will literally almost ruin your day if you don't play him. Now, I've made it kind of a cardinal rule. I almost never play T.Y. Hilton. 4, 5, 6 times a year, it helps me win single-handedly. Once or twice a year, it is the sole reason that I lose a contest. Now, do I ride Hilton sometimes when he's in a chalk supreme spot? I do, because it's safer, but you know who T.Y. Hilton is. He's 4 catches for 40 yards, 5 for 50, boom, 9 catches, 182 yards, and 2 touchdowns. If he's 60% owned against a soft defense and he goes off on a day like that and you don't have him, man, you better nut every other pick if you want any opportunity to go ahead and win, because you are sincerely behind the 8 ball. So guys like that are tough to navigate. It's what makes the game a little bit more difficult sometimes, but it is out there. And when you do lose because you didn't roster T.Y. Hilton, remember all the weeks he was chalk and went for 7 points, and you won because you didn't play him. It's some of the things you have to remind yourself every once in a while. All right, next up. So we've identified the chalk. We are playing guys from higher scoring games. Okay, this is a big spot where I shift from some of the other touts in the industry. And quite honestly, like I say on here sometimes, I don't want to sound too cocky, but I feel pretty confident in my skills on this one. I'd be more than happy to put my record up against most people out there when it comes to NFL DFS cash games. A lot of times you're going to hear people talk about spending down on quarterback and spending down in defense. I couldn't disagree more on these points. Not saying that there won't be weeks that I do that. I'm just saying that as a cardinal rule, I do not hesitate to spend up on quarterback. So let me give you an example. Last night, as I was getting ready to hit the hay, I threw on a video from a bigger name within the industry. A lot of YouTube subscribers and views and everything like that. So I know he's getting the ear of the public a little bit. And he talked about playing Tyrod Taylor against Pittsburgh for 5,400. For me, and let's just say we take a look at Deshaun Watson or Drew Brees, the opportunity for Deshaun Watson and Drew Brees, 2 guys I like this week, to outscore Tyrod Taylor, I mean, that's the good bet, right? In all likelihood, both of these guys outscore him. And not only do they outscore him, the ability is there's a good opportunity they outscore him by double-digit points. So let's say Brees and Watson each go for 26, which is realistic, whether you like one or the other. And Tyrod Taylor has a fine day for who he is, and he gives you 16, 17 points with the legs. Okay, sure, you save the $1,400, which allows you to maybe get that extra stud wide receiver that you want, but you're now 10, 11, 12 points in the hole at the quarterback position. I would rather personally go over to like the running backs. And let's just say you like, what's a good example? You like Kareem Hunt this week. Okay, I like Kareem Hunt. But you want to know what? I also like Archie Collins. And I feel that the opportunity right here that Archie Collins gets outscored by Kareem Hunt is less than I feel the opportunity for the 10 points of difference in the other spot. So for me, I usually grab a stud quarterback. The upside's higher too. There's going to be weeks where, let's just say you pick Cam Newton this week, and that's not my guy, but just using him as an example. And Cam Newton, does a Cam Newton thing, scores 2 rushing touchdowns on 80 yards rushing, gets some yard in the air, goes for 30 points. Well, your low-owned quarterback or your low-dollar quarterback, yeah, you might have saved $1,500, and he got you 19 points, which is a fine day. But again, I'm 11 points plus right there off of only, $1,200 or whatever it might be. And we already talked about what kind of points you're expecting right there. That's a big plus point differential for me. Now, this means you got to make the right picks, of course. But for me, I never hesitate to spend up on quarterback in cash games. And again, without trying to be too braggy, I'll put my cash game record up there with pretty much anybody when it comes to NFL DFS. Not saying there isn't somebody out there who's better. I'm sure that there is. But, 25-5 the last 30 weeks, I hopefully will speak for itself. Now, after that, it's kind of the same rule for me on defense. And the same podcast that I flipped onto real quickly talked about playing the Panthers week 1. Because they're cheap and they're going to allow you to get that extra stud running back or wide receiver. While I don't disagree with the idea of playing a Panthers in a tournament or something like that, I want to ride chalk week 1. And chalk week 1 is most likely going to be the Baltimore Ravens. And when I say most likely, I mean almost for certain. I can identify the Ravens going up against Peterman. And his start last year, he threw 5 interceptions. You got a bad Buffalo team at the road at Baltimore. The Ravens are the team that I feel most people will go to, and it's the guys that I want to take a look at. Now, you can never say with certainty that a team will put up double-digit points, but I do think, look at the 12 points they got against Oakland. I do think that it's a very realistic bet. That's about what they're going to get you. Now, let's say the Panthers are decent against the Cowboys and they get you 6 points, which I think is a decent day for a 2,300 defense or whatever they might be. Okay. Well, again, right there, I'm plus 6 or 7 points on you for only the difference of 1,500. That's a decent bet right there. But more importantly, if things go very, very poorly for the Buffalo Bills and the Baltimore Ravens get a pick six, maybe they collect a bunch of sacks. We saw Peterman throw 5 interceptions in about 3 minutes last year. What if he does that again? And 50% of the field is playing them, and they have one of those big defensive days. You saw them last year go for 16 or more points in 5 separate occasions. If they go for 20 points and you don't have them and your defense nets you 4, you're in for a hurt. That is a difficult proposition to try to overcome. In fact, one of my only cash game losses came last year because I did a bad job of identifying the chalk. Coincidentally, week 1 on defense when it was the Rams, the defense I really liked that I was obviously dead wrong about, didn't get anywhere close to the Rams who put up in the mid-20s. I lost my cash games week 1 by 5 or 6 points. If I had played the correct defense, I would have won easily. Wouldn't have even had to sweat it. Now, I was fortunate in the fact that I won a GPP week 1 and used a different defense, which was helpful. But if I hadn't lucked up that week and gotten that, I would have been upset for about 5 or 6 days that I'd misplayed the defense. I do not mind spending up on defense or on quarterback. It works for me week in and week out. If you had a system that works for you, great. There's a million different ways to skin the cat playing DFS. But for me personally, I don't want to lose out on 20 to 25 points between the quarterback and the defensive positions just to save $2,000 to get that one better wide receiver or running back I like. Now, there are weeks that I will do that. Again, these are generic cardinal rules. Everything is slate dependent. It changes week to week. But more often than not, that's the way that I'm looking. All right. So, again, that's a big difference to me. All right, next up. I wouldn't advise going crazy or nuts on low-owned guys on cash games, but it is definitely okay to play somebody who's low-owned if you think they're in a good position to succeed. I think one of the biggest, what's the best way? Big pivots for me within this was going from a 60, 65% win rate on cash games upwards into the 80, 90% range, whatever it might be. Excuse me, it was not over obsessing with who the chalk is and having that ace in the whole play, that one low-owned guy that you feel really, really good about that you can play in cash games that can separate you from the pack. There's going to be a lot of weeks that if you get good at this, you're going to win cash games, but you're only winning cash games by 5, 6, 7, 8, sometimes less 10 points. And while that 10 points will put you up there a little ways, that's still a pretty close call. One ball bounces a different way and things could really, really change for you. For me, I usually have at least one what I call ace in the hole low-owned guy that I feel really, really comfortable with. That's somebody I will usually be pretty bullish in on the write-up because that's somebody I feel like can help my customers win. Perfect example, we've already brought up Keelan Cole, but last year I believe it was, oh, hell, we can look it up. He's already pulled up for us. Week 15, wasn't it? Yeah, week 15 against Houston. We hard recommended Keelan Cole all over the place. He exceeded even my wildest expectations by going for 186 yards and a touchdown. That was easily the best week for the customers because he was very low owned. He was only 3,700 that day. And by us having him, we all won cash games. A bunch of people won big money in GPPs, but having that ace in the hole. When it works out like this, which will not happen every week, I promise you, I wish I had a guy like this to recommend every week. This is just maybe the best example of it. I promise I do not always have a Keelan Cole like that every week. I wish I could. I'd be a rich man if I had that. But having that ace in the hole guy that you can feel pretty comfortable with that can separate you from the crowd can be really, really big. That's how I view Keelan Cole, or that's how I view him that week. But I usually have at least one guy like that in my lineup who's going to be sub 10% that can be that kind of that differentiator for me. All right. Next up, and the last point that we'll make on this video is going to be understanding game flow. Again, it's game dependent, but let's take an example from this week. New Orleans, let's flip back over to our Vegas odds. You can see is a massive favorite against Tampa Bay, like they should be, right? I would bet the over on this one if I had to. I think New Orleans will win by double digits in this game. So understanding game flow, and what I mean by that is if New Orleans is up by double digits like I expect them to, it's a pretty good bet for us to think that Tampa Bay will have to throw a lot and New Orleans will run the ball a lot. Now, this week's a little bit different on how I would normally evaluate it because the New Orleans for 4 games will be without their bell cow running back. If Mark Ingram was available, this is a week I would like Mark Ingram a lot because they are not going to hesitate to give him a bunch of carries. Again, this is kind of a bad example, but it was the biggest point discrepancy. I wanted to bring it up. On the flip side, Tampa Bay is a team that's going to have to throw a lot. So there are guys like Mike Evans, Godwin, Deshaun Jackson, O.J. Howard, for example, are guys that you could assume will get a bunch of targets. Very often in the DFS world and in fantasy football as a whole, opportunity will trump talent. And if you get more opportunities, you get a better shot for success. And I ask you, who would you rather have? A guy with 12 targets that's only a mediocre player or a good player with 6 targets? I'll take the mediocre player with 12 targets every single time. Will I always win? No, not necessarily, but I'll win more than I lose with a situation like that. So trying to identify game flow. You want high-scoring games are going to be better for you. And you want, if you got like a bell cow, true pound and ground running back in a game where a team might be up by 10 plus points, that guy's going to get an abundance of carries, very likely to reach the end zone. On the flip side, if you got a team that's going to be behind, give me a scat back that's going to tally up, a guy like a Duke Johnson, not him specifically, but you know what I mean? A guy who comes in and just eats up receptions and stuff like that, because they're going to get a lot of those PPR points in a situation like that. So I will take game flow is the number one most important factor in my eyes in making decisions. Yes, point total, I kind of include in that when I say that, but I want game flow. I want quarterbacks that might be behind. If you think New England's going to put up a bunch of points this week, why would you not be interested in Deshaun Watson if you're going to get a lot of volume throws from him and he can throw those legs in there too? So look at game flow. Again, this is another spot where if you don't feel that you have enough time to understand this stuff, if you don't get to watch football every single day like it's your job like I do, lean on Vegas. Again, Vegas has built a very successful business by understanding these things and being right more than they're wrong. So again, we look at that New Orleans and Tampa Bay game. There's a almost 10-point discrepancy on that one. We have a pretty good idea of how that game will shake out. Obviously, nothing's for sure. This is why it's called gambling, but it can be a lot of fun if you do it correctly. And that is something that you really need to pay your attention to. So again, opportunity will often trump skill. And that is something that we need to take a look at on a week in and week out basis. So that's what I got for you this week, guys. We will be coming out with wide receiver info in a little bit. And I don't know. I'll see you guys a lot this week as we're talking football pretty heavily. All right, y'all. Thanks. Have a great day.